Hey y'all, Gary Humble with Tennessee Stands. I'm not gonna lie, let's just be honest. Yesterday, watching House Bill 10, the Religious Exemption Protection Act, die in the Tennessee House Health Subcommittee was hard to watch. Um, and it's actually incredible to me that it died in a subcommittee with only 3 votes. Keep in mind, this was a bill that had 16, now actually 17 co-sponsors, I believe, in the House alone, and thousands of calls to these committee members from Tennesseans across the state. And yet it died, which to me shows that this committee was more concerned about passing laws according to their own ideology and according to their dollars, their campaign contributions, than they were their constituents and the people of Tennessee. But nonetheless, I want to give you sort of a little play-by-play because I want to make really sure you understand what happened. And look, I just want to be upfront in saying HB 10 was a really they made it really confusing and complicated sounding, but this could not have been a simpler bill. It secured religious exemptions for parents, for students, and for employees, and for everyone around the state. And it struck a law that allowed the Board of Health to force you to have a vaccine under penalty of a Class C misdemeanor. That's what the bill did, and that's what died in the House Health Subcommittee, thanks in large part to Representative Robin Smith out of Chattanooga, which I'm just saying, Chattanooga, can you do something different in 2022? Because you made a huge error in electing this woman to our General Assembly. But let's just talk about some of the things that were said. And I want to give you the opportunity to really see with your own eyes what was being said. So let's go to this first clip from Robin Smith.
Our church has a child care facility. And if that child care facility at my church, I go to a Southern Baptist church, if that child care facility needed to ask its employees who have direct supervision over children to take a tuberculosis test, an exam, to have a condition of employment, to if there should be an outbreak of hepatitis A, if you could offer how this amendment would impact a business such as a church daycare center on the ability to protect children. So what I'm hearing you say, and this is not rehearsed in case someone is believing that we've had a meeting before the meeting, what I'm hearing you say is that the safety of the public has been removed from a condition of employment.
It's interesting to me how many times she said the word church, my church, and then we bring the children into it, my church daycare, oh, the children, oh, the church. And she's making an emotional plea. She's not making a legal argument. Also, the idea that this was, I want to make sure this was, this wasn't rehearsed. When we have to qualify things like that, you typically know what that means. But what you see from Representative Smith is she's weighing the rights of employers and employees, so to speak, or really the church and the children and employees. And what I want to make sure you hear clearly is that she believes that employers, and you'll hear this later on too from someone else, but that employers have the right to require and force under threat of losing their job to require you to have a vaccination or a medical treatment. It's one of the key things we were trying to fix with this bill is this idea that the public health outweighs a liberty secured by our Constitution. And some may argue, well, what about the rights of employers? I get that, but listen, employers have a lot of rights, way more actually, in my opinion, than the employers in the state of than the employees in the state of Tennessee. You realize that the state of Tennessee is an employment at will state. That means that your employer can fire you for almost any reason. Your employer can fire you in the state of Tennessee because you smell bad, and you don't have a lot of legal recourse in terms of a wrongful termination. So employers have a great deal of levity when it comes to dealing with their employees. So we just feel that by rights of conscience secured by our Constitution, again, which we'll talk about in a minute, it's a really simple thing to secure someone's bodily autonomy and have a right to earn a living and a right to work without being compelled by a government or by an employer at the threat of losing their job and their livelihood of receiving a vaccine or any kind of medical treatment that they don't want. That doesn't purport that gives them the right to get everyone sick. That's a liberal talking point, by the way, not a very conservative one. But these are the talking points that come up. Let's take a look at the next clip.
Does this prohibit a daycare center, a restaurant? And again, I do understand I am saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian. I believe we have religious liberty. And I do believe we need to fight for it. That's why I'm a co-sponsor of Bud Halsey's bill that's very specific for COVID vaccine.
All right, let's break here for a minute. She continues the church talk, and she's missed religious liberty, and she's just out to protect you. And by the way, in case you missed that, she's saved by the blood of Jesus. Well, I'm sure she is. But let's talk about House Bill 13 for a minute, because this is one of the lies that you're being told about, House Bill 10 is this really dangerous bill, but she supports the real bill for liberty, House Bill 13. Let me make sure that every one of you clearly understands what House Bill 13 does, which, by the way, I'm not against House Bill 13. The problem is that it just doesn't do anything. It does literally nothing. House Bill 13 purports to do one thing and one thing only. It prevents a state agency from mandating the COVID vaccine. That's it. It deals with no other disease. It deals with no other medical treatment. It doesn't deal with religious exemptions for parents in schools and for employees. It doesn't deal with the private employer whatsoever. It doesn't deal with government compulsory treatment and vaccines under threat of a Class C misdemeanor. It literally does nothing. But here's what's something to recognize even further. It says a state can't mandate the COVID vaccine. You realize that the state currently cannot mandate the COVID vaccine because it's under the EUA. It's emergency use authorization. It's not approved by the FDA, which means that no one can legally mandate the COVID vaccine right now anyway. And God knows when it's actually going to be FDA approved. So literally when HB 13 passes, I want to be clear, it will have no function in the law whatsoever. When House Bill and if House Bill 13 passes, hear me again what I'm telling you right now. It will have no function in law whatsoever. It does nothing that the law currently does not do right now. Yet, Representative Smith is telling you that she's going to save you. She's going to protect you from the horrors of House Bill 10, and she's going to protect you with HB 13. She's either incredibly misinformed or she's a liar. One of those two. You take your pick. Let's continue.
In looking at religions, there are only 5 religions that enforce and teach vaccine objections. And interestingly enough, it seems that population of religious adherence has grown significantly. I also have studied that the Charlotte Lozier Institute has found that both Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are not morally controversial because they're not studied, researched, tested, or produced out of fetal cells.
Stop. Let's talk about the 5 religions and the Charlotte Lozier Institute for just a moment. First off, I want to make sure you understand, and I only know this because she posted it on her Facebook page, this idea of that there's only 5 religions that denounce the use of vaccines. That came from an article from Vanderbilt Medical University. That's right. Representative Smith gets her information on on religious exemptions and vaccines, you got it, from Vanderbilt Medical University. That's her resource. Is that not illuminating to you, or what? Of course, Vanderbilt is no friend to religious exemptions and have one interest and one interest only. Again, I'm just going to leave that to your own determination and what you've seen thus far. But let's talk about this Charlotte Lozier Institute about morally controversial vaccines. I've actually seen that report, and she's right. The report does deem the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine ethically uncontroversial. But the report is mistaken in one regard, and that claim is disputed by many. A simple Google search will show you all of the differing opinions out there. In fact, as you're seeing here, there's an article from Nebraska Medical where Dr. Lawler is clear that the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, while they are not, which we've acknowledged, they're not produced with aborted fetal cell lines. They were in the concept of the mRNA vaccine, which they are manufactured from, most certainly was tested with aborted fetal cells. That technology found proof of concept by using the HEK 293 aborted fetal cell lines, which came from an aborted baby in the Netherlands in 1973. And by the way, specifically from the renal cells, from the kidney cells of that baby. That's what you'll find if you actually go out and do the research on your own. So the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, just make sure you understand this, could not exist. They could not be on the market today if it were not for aborted fetal cells that stemmed from an aborted baby in 1973. If you take a look at this document from the North Dakota Department of Health, the North Dakota Department of Health also acknowledges that these two vaccines did use aborted fetal cell lines in the testing phase. But I love the statement that they make here on this document that essentially says, don't worry if you're concerned about conscience. This only used abortions that have already happened. It's not going to require any new abortions. So all's good. Everything's good. No worries here. Nothing to see. We don't need to abort any more babies. This just wouldn't be possible had we aborted some in the past. It's an incredible statement and an acknowledgement, again, from a state health department in North Dakota. Yet Representative Smith is not telling you any of this. She's representing complete falsehoods in this committee and not giving you both sides of the story, which is expressly the point that we're trying to make with this bill, is that government does not get to determine your conscience for you. And that's what she doesn't get. See, in her mind, she's trying to define religion for you. She's trying to figure out, what religion provides and what it doesn't. Which religions, like vaccines and which ones don't. And by the way, this is uncontroversial, so you shouldn't care anyway. The problem is her and the government does not get to make those determinations. It's precisely why we have a right of conscience secured by the Constitution of this state, so that you and I get to look at the data and we get to make those determinations on our own. Government should not compel law to force things on people concerning matters of conscience. Religious exemptions are a thing, and they have been upheld constitutionally by the Supreme Court more than once. So that's a complete breakdown in the conversation we're trying to have, and something that these lawmakers simply don't get is that we're not asking you your opinion. We don't care what you think. We're simply saying the government has a right to allow each citizen to act upon their own conscience. Let's move on.
I do respect religious liberty. I want to support that. But I know at my church, Child Development Center, those children have a right to be free of tuberculosis, hepatitis A, and any other communicable disease, and they're placed in the care of others. So, Mr. King, if I could, just get a reading to understand, because I want to support your bill. On February the 2nd, I wrote you an email and I said, I want to support this bill. And I received a response from an activist telling me how wrong I was. And so I want to vote for this bill, but it's my job not to win political points. It's not my job to look good on social media.
Let me address these two things really, really quick. The idea that you have a right not to be sick is a ridiculous statement. No one has a right by law or a natural right or a right purported by any constitution, whether it be U.S. or the state of Tennessee, to not be sick. Sickness is something that we encounter. It's something that at times we do trust our medical community with, and we trust God Almighty with. My God, we get sick sometimes for virtually no reason at all. Who knows how these things come and go? But the idea that we have a right not to be sick, I don't even understand what she's saying there. But let me also address this email. Here's this email that she's referring to. What she's inferring by her statement is somehow this activist, by the way, which was me, sent her this derogatory, terrible email. And I want you to see this email because I want you to see how straightforward and polite it was in answering her questions. Somehow, in Representative Smith's mind, we're under this massive hepatitis A epidemic, which I'm not aware of. I don't know if you're aware of it. But nonetheless, somewhere, maybe in Chattanooga somewhere, I don't know, we have an incredibly horrible hepatitis A. Maybe at her Southern Baptist Church in their daycare center, there is a horrible hepatitis A outbreak. Nonetheless, she had some questions about hepatitis A. As you can see in this email, I've quoted directly, there was some great information from the Veterans Administration, right from the .gov website. Some great information from the Mayo Clinic, essentially that there's no treatment for hepatitis A, that your body will clear it itself, and that in most cases it heals in 6 months. There was also some great information from the CDC. It's important to note that the CDC, in order to control hepatitis A, does not suggest vaccination as the best mode. And again, like I told you, her idea is that employers need the right to enforce some sort of medical treatment. There is no treatment, which was my point I was trying to make to her. There's no treatment for hepatitis A, and the CDC doesn't necessarily state that vaccination is the best way to prevent a hepatitis A outbreak. Guess what the CDC recommends? Washing your hands. The number one way that hepatitis A is spread is by infectious stool. That's right. You went to the bathroom, you didn't wash your hands, and you're giving everybody hepatitis A, which, by the way, there's no treatment for, and your body gets better automatically in 6 months. But that's not even the point. The point is the way that you prevent an outbreak of hepatitis A, per the CDC, is to wash your hands, which I think every daycare center probably has a regimen for, and every restaurant has a pretty good regimen for, which is why today you are not seeing hepatitis A outbreaks. But somehow she's trying to convince you that House Bill 10, if we pass this and we give employees the rights to their own body by their rights of conscience and their religious beliefs, that we're going to kill everyone. We're going to harm all the children, and the churches won't be able to protect themselves from hepatitis A. Again, here's this email. I gave her some information with direct quotes from these websites, and I said, I hope this is helpful. Gary. I never received a response. She never asked another question. I assumed that I had sufficiently and satisfactorily answered that question, yet I'm just this mean old activist that's out to prove a point and out to get her. Let's move on.
I appreciate that. And if you could cite me in our Tennessee Code where right of conscience is defined, please.
Chairley Smith, I don't have a citation to that. I can certainly locate what we have. However, in that context, we are speaking more to constitutional provisions than we are to a specific definition. So I think if we are looking for a definition, I don't believe we have one, but I will double check.
And if I might, Mr. Chairman, would it be in your legal opinion that a right of conscience would automatically mean a sincerely held belief?
Shirley Smith, just to give you further clarity on what we were speaking about a minute ago with regard, you asked about rights of conscience. I didn't have a citation at the time. I can read to you now from the Tennessee Constitution, Article 1, Section 3, that does contain that language. And before I read that, I'll just say that a search of Tennessee code for rights of conscience did not produce any results in the statutory language. However, in the constitutional language, in Article 1, Section 3 of the Tennessee Constitution, it reads as follows, that all men have a natural and indefeasible right to worship Almighty God according to the dictates of their own conscience, that no man can of right be compelled to attend, erect, or support any place of worship, or to maintain any minister against his consent, that no human authority can, in any case whatever, control or interfere with the rights of conscience, and that no preference shall ever be given by law to any religious establishment or mode of worship. So I think that is most directly on point with your question.
Is that illuminating, Chair Lady? Okay. We appreciate that, Mr. King.
Let's talk about right of conscience for a minute. So she asked the question, which by the way, it's a legitimate question. Where is right of conscience defined? Is it defined in our Tennessee Code annotated? The issue that I have with this is that we don't even understand as lawmakers. And I say we, I'm not a lawmaker. They don't even understand as lawmakers the rights secured by our Constitution and how those things are succinctly different from the laws made in the Tennessee Code annotated. We're not referencing a statute passed by the legislature by invoking a right of conscience. We are quoting from Article 1, Section 3, a constitutionally secured right of conscience. Let's talk about what that is for a minute. There was this goes all the way back to before our founding, and there are two trains of thought. One is the kind of John Locke, Thomas Jefferson belief that you have religion, a sphere of religion here, and you have a sphere of civil government here. And while as a Christian, we certainly should obey the law of God more than man, civil government has a realm of authority over creating laws that compel us, that compel our actions. They can't touch our beliefs, but they can compel our actions. But then there were the Baptists and the Presbyterians that were forming America and drafting our Constitution, including men like James Madison, who is the father of our Constitution, who believed not so that there was a constitutionally secured right of conscience, that right of conscience was divinely given by God, and that government had no purview over it. And that religion wasn't just a matter of belief, but that religion was also a matter of exercise. Remember, we have a freedom to exercise our religion. That means to act it out. Our religion is more than just a system of beliefs. Our actions also have a lot to do with how we serve and how we worship. So that's why Madison uses the phrase conscience, because he's being really clear that government doesn't have a right to define what your religious beliefs are for you. And government doesn't have a right to define how you act out your beliefs through your conscience in action. And so this is the basic premise for religious exemptions in the United States, because this is an American ideal that we have a right to practice our religion by right of conscience. James Madison, whenever he first kind of put this to paper in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, said this: all men are entitled to the full and free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience. Later, in a memorial and a remonstrance, he said this: the religion then of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man. So just the basic idea that Representative Smith thinks she has the right as a governing authority to even ask the question about which religions allow vaccines and which doesn't clearly shows a large disconnect in her understanding of how America has always understood religious belief and exercise of religion and rights of conscience. And even so much more here in the state of Tennessee, as Mr. King read directly from our Constitution, that no human authority has a right to interfere with rights of conscience. That's an incredibly strong statement, and it's what makes our Tennessee Constitution so strong. But it's not so strong, is it, if lawmakers continue to ignore it and choose not even to understand it. All right, let's move on from Representative Smith, and now we're going to listen to some remarks from Sabi Kumar.
If in a public school there is a child who's immunosuppressed and there is a child who comes to school and the family does not want that child vaccinated, the public school in the interest of protecting the immunosuppressed child can ask the child who's not taking vaccination to take vaccination.
Here, what would be permitted is that they could require an examination of that child. So to make sure that that child who had not had the vaccination type, and it would have to be a medical examination that met that definition. So a standard, routine, non-invasive screening, such as a temperature check type of scenario. So it would have to meet that definition of standard, routine, non-invasive screening.
Okay, so that they cannot require a vaccination because that's invasive.
That's correct.
Well, thank you. That's an important matter. Sincerely, I think our committee and my colleagues are quite torn about this. Conservatism and liberty are in our DNA. All of us want to support liberty, and that's an important part of our Constitution and our society and our nation. I'm old enough to remember the admonition that extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. That is true, and we go far. But then again, as has been explained by the analogy of shadowboxing, that extremism should not put others in harm's way or potentially stand to harm others. In the middle of a public health emergency, there is threat to many lives, and if we cannot protect those lives, then we are failing, although we are doing it in the interest of liberty. At the end of each bill we pass in this legislature, there are words that are really valuable. It says, "This shall become law on this particular date, public welfare requiring it." Public welfare requiring it. It does not say, what we are changing is that this shall become law on this date, my quest for liberty requiring it. No, it's the public welfare that we are here to vote for and work for, and it is the public we are at large who we are representing. Surely we protect the minority as well, but then again, it is the public welfare that we are here to protect and not to sacrifice in the quest of my own quest for liberty. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The main takeaway that I want you to get from this man, who, by the way, seems like a really gentle and nice man, he just doesn't get it. And of course, he's a doctor, so there's that. But he starts out by being excited to support the bill because he's thinking that Representative Brian Terry and Representative Robin Smith have worked out a deal and that they've amended the bill in such a way that allows schools to forcibly vaccinate children. So in his mind, he's thinking, I just want to thank y'all for fixing this. Looks like we can forcibly vaccinate kids, so I'm okay with it. Until they realize that none of them know what in the world they're talking about. It's amazing the amount of confusion that was happening on this bill. And then there's finally clarity that, wait, no, this bill says that schools cannot compel by force a student to be vaccinated. So wait a minute, you mean that this immunocompromised child is not protected? And then he goes off the rails that, well, this is just, this is extreme liberty. I want you to know that Representative Kumar thinks that if you believe in individual liberties, if you believe in religious liberties, if you believe in rights of conscience, if you've read our Tennessee Constitution, you need to know that you are dangerous and you are an extremist. You are an extreme liberty person. Okay, this is the sentiment coming from our Health Subcommittee in the Tennessee General Assembly, and it's incredible. Basically, in Sabi Kumar's mind, let's just say Sally is a student and she's in a school of 5,000 kids. Sally is immunocompromised. So there's a danger posed for her. In Sabi Kumar's mind, in order for Sally to have liberty, because remember, per Representative Smith, we have a right to not be sick. Okay? So let that sit with you for a minute. In Sabi Kumar's mind, for Sally to have liberty, then the other 4,999 students need to be forcibly vaccinated, okay, so that Sally is safe. And if we can pass a law that forces the 4,999 other students to receive a vaccine and we can protect Sally, then in Sabi's mind, we have both protected the individual and we've protected liberty. That's incredible to me. That is absolutely incredible. Does Sally deserve some kind of reasonable accommodation? Sure. Should we work to protect her? Sure, absolutely. I agree with that. But does it mean that we need to force medical treatment and vaccinations on almost 5,000 other children? Hell no. That's not what that means. And that's not liberty. And that's not the kind of liberty our Constitution secures. It's an incredible breakdown in what you are seeing. But if anything, I'm glad that you get to see it. Let's take a look at one more representative.
This is difficult for me, and I'm all for religious rights, and I still, in my meager mind, do not see really why we're talking about this, because I don't know of anybody that's mandating they're going to get you down and hold you and give you a vaccination. I think it's still within our rights to not have a vaccination. And someone said last week, well, the University of Tennessee may require it, but if they do require it, you're still not mandated to have it. You don't have to go to that school. You can go to another school that doesn't require it. So I think that we're really not mandating. And I'd like to ask the question is, in the business world, if I'm, say, a restaurant owner, and I don't have any patrons or customers come because my folks are not vaccinated, so I ask them and require them to be vaccinated to work at my restaurant, and they say they don't want to be vaccinated, and what's my recourse? Is I can put them in a job washing dishes, maybe, that doesn't require them meeting the public, or I can let them go. And do they have a right to sue me for letting them go if they don't have this vaccination?
Now, make sure you get some of these points from Representative Marsh. Make sure you understand, because he's all about religious exemptions and he's all about religious liberty, but you need to understand what he's saying here. Okay, again, this is not a conservative mindset. This is a leftist mindset. He's saying, I don't see anyone working to mandate these vaccines in Tennessee. I mean, no one's going to hold you down and do this to you, so we don't need to pass a law. Right, because you and I have seen that government would never do anything that it shouldn't. Even when the law says that it shouldn't, they're still doing it. But in Representative Marsh's mind, nobody's going to do this in Tennessee. I mean, why are we even talking about this? This law is ridiculous. If that's the case, Representative Marsh, then you and I are on the same page. Pass HB 10. Take away the government's right to force a vaccination if you don't need it. Otherwise, why are we not passing HB 10? Why are we keeping the door open for government to compel medical treatment and vaccinations on its citizens? It's a great question. The other thing he brings up is, UT might mandate a vaccine. They might not, but if they do, that's not an infringement on your liberty. Just go to another school. So let me get this straight. UT, which is a state-sponsored university, partly funded by my tax dollars, which, by the way, all state schools, they're all going to do the same thing. You realize this. If one does it, they all will. So if all state-funded schools mandate a vaccine that you don't want to take, Well, you're just out of luck. You've now got to shell out the dough, God help you, to go to a private school to get an education so that you won't be forcibly vaccinated. Again, this is supposed to protect your liberty. These are incredible statements from these representatives. Again, like I said earlier, I don't know if there's just a true intellectual disconnect here, or if they're just lying. I really don't know. Lastly, what you heard from him clearly is that he has this belief that the employer rights, business owner rights are higher than the rights of the employee. And that's, you're going to see that as we continue these discussions in the other bill that we're in our discrimination bill that we have. You're going to see these legislators talk about the rights of business owners, but what about the rights of individuals? Somehow in these people's minds, the rights of employers and business owners always trump the individual. I don't know if that's because of campaign dollars or money or what it is, but that's always the case. Business always outweighs the right of the individual. So look, I know this has been a long video and we've talked about a lot, but I hope you watched it and I hope you're sharing this and I hope you're paying attention, because these are the kinds of sentiments in our General Assembly that if we're ever going to see liberty like we need to see it, if we're ever truly going to be protected from what seems to be a continually infringing federal government upon the rights of the states and the rights of its citizens, then we have to change these sentiments in our General Assembly. We have to have state representatives and senators that are willing to stand up and hold to the Constitution and defend liberty against tyranny. And I'm just telling you right now, as you just saw clearly, we do not have that. We do not have that today in our General Assembly, and it's a crying shame. And so, if anything, I hope this gets you activated. I hope it gets you paying attention. And I hope that coming into 22, remember, every person you saw in this video is up for re-election every 2 years, which means if you live in the districts of Robin Smith, Pat Marsh, and Sabi Kumar, and coming up into the 2022 Republican primaries, my God, somebody needs to run for office. There needs to be some other options in those districts than those people that sit in that seat. So let that be a challenge to you. You need to go get that done. No one else can do that but you. We're all responsible for where we live. This was a hard loss. I can't say I'm surprised, but I'm glad you got to see it. And Tennessee, we've got a lot of work to do. God bless you.